Hello, my loves, and welcome back to Strange Playgrounds. Interesting one this time around, almost a throwback to earlier iterations of this channel, of the Exaggerated Elegy channel. I don't normally do this anymore. I don't really debate or argue with people online. I don't particularly get involved in ideological debates because, by and large, it's a waste of time. It doesn't work. Particularly, I mean, in this instance, we were talking about religion, we were talking about belief as it pertains to the notion of a perfect creator entity. It was just one of those bizarre debates that I fell into just arbitrarily. And as I say, normally I don't do this anymore because I've come to my conclusions on this. And I have not yet, I mean, in all of my time talking with, debating with those whose perspectives are alternative to mine, I've never come across an argument that even begins to move mine, that even begins to make me reconsider my own position, if I'm perfectly honest. Although I do it myself all the time, because it's an interesting intellectual exercise. From my perspective, the notion of, and it doesn't matter what ideology you're coming from, it doesn't matter whether it's Christianic, whether it's Abrahamic in general, so Judaic, Muslim, or any one of the myriad subcultures and sects, or whatever tradition you want. To me, the notion of a perfect creator is dead on arrival. It is internally not only inconsistent, but impossible, contradictory by its very nature. Let me explain that, because you need to understand where I'm coming from. So, what does perfection necessarily entail? To me, the assumptions of perfection entail a condition that cannot change. It cannot change because it's perfect, right? It's absolute. There can be no change of state or condition. And in that regard, the notion of a conscious thinking entity with thought and emotions is impossible. It's totally impossible because thoughts, by their very nature, are processes. Emotions, feelings, by their very nature, are processes. They signify a transition from one condition to another by their very existence, by their very nature. So a perfect entity cannot have a mind. It cannot have consciousness. It certainly can't have design. If an entity has design, if it has intention to create, then it has intention to change its state. The very existence of the intention self utterly torpedoes the notion of it being a perfect entity. The irony is that creation itself, the existence of anything, of reality, utterly is the most absolute evidence against there being a perfect creator entity. There cannot be a perfect creator. If something is perfect, then by its very nature, it can't have the intention to create, it can't have the inspiration to create, and it cannot create. Because creation, by its very nature, is a change of state. It's a change of condition. Therefore, its original condition cannot be perfect, right? It is changing its own condition by not only by the act of creation, but by the intention of wanting to create, by having inspiration. What you've got there is the application of very human conditions, very finite phenomena, to a divine entity, right? Now, if you want to talk about an imperfect creator entity, like you find in a lot of pagan religions, or if you want to talk about an entity that kind of interfered in the process of creation, but it's sort of experimenting and mucking around with it, fine. I don't believe that, but that is far more credible than the notion of a perfect, omnipresent, omnibenevolent creator entity. It just doesn't make sense. Not only that, I mean, this is another thing. But creation, by its very nature, suggests operation within a temporal linear structure. So if a thing has intention to create, then it is processing from one state of time to another in the same way that we do. We poor entities that perceive time in this very linear way as a cause and effect from one moment to the next. An omnipresent, a perfect entity cannot possibly operate like that. It must by necessity operate as though all times and all probabilities all exist at once, you know? I'm more comfortable with the Lovecraftian notion of a creator entity, like Atzathoth. Now, Atzathoth in Lovecraftian mythology is not a conscious god as we would understand it. It doesn't intend to create anything. It is this seething nuclear chaos at the heart of creation, and all realities are but dreams of potential coming from Atzathoth. It doesn't intend anything, it just occurs because Atzathoth dreams it or conceives it. That I have more time for than this notion of a perfect creator entity, which, as I've already established, is impossible. You cannot have a perfect creator entity. It doesn't add up. It doesn't work given certain assumptions of perfection. Now, what your biblical literalist will say, what your Quranic literalist will say is, you're operating with regards to secular notions of perfection which don't exist within the texts and blah, blah, blah. Well, that's a problem for the texts then, isn't it? Because it doesn't matter whether these preconceptions exist within the texts or not. These notions, what I would say is these characteristics of perfection are more all-encompassing and more legitimately perfect, and therefore it's a problem for the biblical notion of perfection, isn't it? Yeah? It's if the very nature of perfection is such that if you can conceive of a more encompassing and purer and more absolute set of characteristics for it than others presume, then those are the characteristics you have to go with because that's the nature of perfection, right? So my preconceptions that I've established here, my assumptions and characteristics of perfection, by their nature, utterly torpedo those that exist within traditional mythology, because those that exist within traditional mythology are finite. Once again, the attributions of perfection that exist within the Bible, for example, or they're not even within the Bible, because the Bible actually does not, in any way, shape, or form, promote the God entity as perfect. That came later. That comes within centuries of Christianic and generally Abrahamic apologism and philosophizing and whatnot. But what I would say is that that entity is incredibly finite and operates within human parameters with regards to, for example, time, emotion, thought. The fact that it has to experiment, as with Job, for example, where it doesn't know what is going to happen. So it sets up this contest. It's ridiculous, right? If it is genuinely perfect, then why would it need to do that? Why doesn't it already operate in the myriad potentials where one outcome has occurred and another outcome has occurred, right? It's very clear from stories like that that the Abrahamic God, the biblical God certainly, is very finite and operates with regards to linear temporality, if you like. It operates in spaces of moments in the same way that humans do, from one moment to the next. But we can conceive, I've just done it, we can conceive of more expansive and sincerely perfect way, and certainly more sincerely divine ways of operation, i.e., existing already in all of those potentials, as a lot of Lovecraftian entities do, or perceiving those potentials as sort of like divine calculations, yeah? Understanding that those potentials can occur, which the biblical God doesn't seem to when you look at the stories attributed to it. But what the person I was arguing with was trying to say is that, oh, God is like a parent and it wants us to thrive, and that's why it doesn't give us everything. That's why there's suffering in the world, because it allows us to thrive. I mean, it's a ridiculous argument. It's a ridiculous fucking argument. For a start, the attribution of the creator God as parent doesn't work. Analogy doesn't work. Parents, as we understand them, when they conceive and give birth to a child, are operating under parameters. They're operating under the parameters of the world in which they exist with their own biology. They don't determine the nature and parameters and assumptions of the reality into which that child is born. So they're operating under very, very, very narrow strictures. That's not true of a creator entity. A divine creator entity, it seems to me, arbitrarily creates things for no fucking reason. By the way, this has never been answered. Why does a perfect entity create anything? Why would it need to? Why would it want to? And then, because here's what you ask people who vouchsafe this kind of argument: what pressures are operating upon it? If it's perfect and it has infinite power, then there is nothing acting upon it that means that the assumptions of the reality it creates are necessary. So any reality where the suffering is immediately fucking sadistic and evil, right? Just by its very nature. If there is such a thing as even like the most minute amount of suffering or want or despair or need in creation that is the product of a purportedly perfect creator, then that purportedly perfect creator isn't perfect. Yeah? And it's immediately sadistic and cruel, and because it's arbitrary. It's arbitrary. You and I, you listening to this here, can immediately conceive of better and more perfect ways of organizing reality. If we had access to just infinite whimsical capacity and power to rearrange reality on a whim, you and I, sitting here now, we poor finite entities, can conceive of any number of better ways of organizing reality. Here's one. What about, I mean, I would argue, why are there conscious entities at all? Why would you do that? Why would you have any need to do that? Why is there any need for consciousness full stop? Why is there existence? It doesn't matter. This entity doesn't need anything, right? It's perfect. So why does it arbitrarily create consciousness at all? Why does it arbitrarily create life? Under those assumptions, life and consciousness become flictions. They become cruelty. It means that we are all just these arbitrary toys wandering around, um, suffering arbitrarily for no reason, for no fucking reason. A better analogy is that, I mean, this isn't perfect either, but certainly a better analogy is that of a video game designer. Right? Now, video game designers do operate under restrictions. Obviously, they operate under technological restrictions, under the restrictions of budget and of tools. So even they operate under greater strictures than this purportedly perfect entity. But a video game designer does have certain lassitude. They can they determine the rules and assumptions upon which the world they create operate, and the pressures under which the entities that inhabit that world also operate. So a video game designer can create a reality in which there's no want, where where living entities do not need to feed at all. They don't need, and they certainly don't need to feed on one another, which is one of the most ridiculous cruelties. If you look at this reality, all as we know it, life, and it's all life. It's not just carnivorous life. It's all life. It's plants. It's fungi. Everything needs to feed on living matter, other living things to survive. So that's just cruelty. That is arbitrary, unnecessary cruelty. If you or I were designing a reality without limitation, that just wouldn't occur, right? There wouldn't be the other thing this guy vouchsafed was, oh well, we need suffering in order to experience and grow. My response back is, you are misunderstanding. You are not seeing the expansiveness of this argument. There would be, you can design, if you have no parameters acting upon you, then you can create a reality in which the entities that occur within that reality do not need suffering, do not need pain, do not need pressures acting upon them in order to experience learning, revelation, transformation. You could create a reality which is just one gigantic, perpetual, limitless existential orgasm, right? Where you are transitioning from one condition to the next constantly without any pressure, without any suffering, without any want or need at all. I've just conceived of that, and I'm a human. I'm a very finite, very fallible human contained within this skull, within these biological constraints, and that is a better reality than this one. And if you can do that, children do this. Children do this when they play games, when they write, when they draw, when they create little pictures and whatnot. Children conceive of better realities than this purportedly perfect entity, right? It's insane. It's an insane argument. There is only, I mean, the way I conceive of this, there is no wiggle room here. It is ultimately the problem of evil repackaged, right? And the reason it's the problem of evil repackaged is because there's never been a good response to that. In all of the history, the long centuries of Christian apologia, of theological philosophizing, there has never been a good response to it because it is dynamite. The problem of evil is absolute dynamite. It completely destroys the very concept of there being a perfect creator entity, and they know it. I mean, like, the honest theologian, the best response I've seen to the problem of evil and problems like the ones I've set up here is, yeah, it's an issue and we need to grapple with it. The honest theologian, the honest believer will respond like that. It is a sincere problem and a seeming ideological contradiction, and a problem that we need to grapple with sincerely. The dishonest ones, they will throw this distractionary, diversionary garbage at you, where they pretend to not understand and where they try to move the goalposts along. The other thing he said was, "It sounds like you just want to, you want an easy ride. You just want things to be the way you want them." That's not the point. And also, that's the moment when you know they're being dishonest, when they change the parameters of the argument to bring it down to almost essentially a kind of ad hominem. Yeah? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is suffering is totally unnecessary and arbitrary. If you preconceive the existence of a perfect creator entity that operates under no parameters, no strictures, and therefore no requirements, then the assumptions of reality are arbitrary by their very nature. Therefore, suffering, want, need, limitation, parameter, all the things under which biological life and matter operates are arbitrary, completely arbitrary, and not just arbitrary, fucking cruel. It is sadistic in a way that the most genocidal, monstrous regime in all of human history could not conceive of. It is malevolent in a way that all the devils and demons and antagonists of mythology cannot equal. It cannot even hold a candle to. It is monstrous. It is so evil that even if that thing existed, this ultimately powerful entity, then I would be its enemy. I would be, even knowing that it could just snuff me out on a whim, even knowing that it could just make me suffer the worst things imaginable. It would be the most evil thing in existence. It would be the most sadistic thing in existence and powerfully imperfect. As we established at the very beginning, the very notion of perfection precludes the notion of creation. By its very nature, perfect entity could not desire to change its state, could not conceive of changing its state, because it's perfect, it is perpetual, it is the same it's not even from moment to moment, because it doesn't exist in moment to moment. That's a human attribution. It operates in all spaces, at all times, in all potentials, all at once, and therefore doesn't transition. It doesn't have process like human beings do. Again, what you've got there are powerfully limited human beings attributing human assumptions to a purportedly perfect divine entity. That's what you've got there. And I have not yet heard an argument or even come across concept that begins to approach this from the believer, from the theological or creationist perspective. Never once, never in my life. It's a real problem. In fact, it's a powerful problem for those who believe in a literal perfect creator. And as I say, the only honest way of grappling with it is by grappling with it. It's by saying, and I know, I'm friends with a couple of Christians and believers, and I know this is their, because we've had this discussion. This is their response, which is it's a real problem. We need to think about it. We need to actually, the process of grappling with it. It's part of being believer. It's part of being identifying in this way, and having these beliefs. If we're honest, it's part of it, and that's what we need to do.